بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب ولا الضالين آمين.
Alright, so we're going to go ahead and start off with the video clip here, so I hope so.
Both of you guys we're not there yet. Well, you're further than anybody said you would be. And I have enough class, I was raised well enough to say, when you outdo, yes, sir, thank you. When you outdo expectations, good for you. But there's another side to this. People have talked about a miracle. I'm hearing about a nightmare. It's hard to be a parent tonight for a lot of us. You tell your kids, don't be a bully. You tell your kids, don't be a bigot. You tell your kids, do your homework and be prepared. And then you have this outcome, and you have people putting children to bed tonight, and they're afraid of breakfast. They're afraid of, how do I explain this to my children? I have Muslim friends who are texting me tonight saying, should I leave the country? I have families of immigrants that are terrified tonight. This was many things. This was a rebellion against the elites. True, it was a complete reinvention of politics and polls, it's true. But it was also something else. We've talked about race, we've talked about everything but race tonight. We've talked about income, we've talked about class, we've talked about region. We haven't talked about race. This was a white lash. This was a white lash against a changing country. It was a white lash against a black president in part. And that's the part where the pain comes. And Donald Trump has a responsibility tonight to come out and reassure people that he is going to be the president of all the people who he insulted and offended and brushed aside. Yeah, when you say you want to take your country back, you got a lot of people who feel that we're not represented well either. But we don't want to feel that someone has been elected by throwing away some of us to appeal more deeply to others. So this is a deeply painful moment tonight. I know it's not just about race. There's more going on than that. But race is here too. We got to talk about it.
So Assalamu alaikum. So Jazakallahu for everybody to come out, the speakers, on such short notice to arrange their schedules to come and address everybody tonight. Before we formally get started, I do want to make some housekeeping announcements here as far as the breakout session. So there will be a breakout session, and the coordinators are telling me that 9:10 is the ideal time that we want to break out. We want to have adults in one area, we want to have the youth, and we want to have everybody be able to kind of connect on a different level. But we will start off the presentation with some talks. But before we get into the speakers, I just want to have everybody just take a moment, and I really mean this, to look around the room and think about the background of everybody who's in this room, and not only in terms of their ethnicity, obviously the religion, but we do have some guests who are kind enough to visit us who are non-Muslim, your professions, and then just look around at the diversity that we have in our own room here. And I want you to think about how many people are immigrants and how many people are children of immigrants. And then just take a moment just to absorb that just in this room. So I personally was in Chicago on the night of the election. My wife and I had two separate reactions. My wife was extremely concerned. She's a psychiatrist, and so she was worrying about the psychological impact that might have on our own children. And I was inspired, and we were, quite honestly, astaghfirullah, if I can say this, Imam Ali, we were actually watching a play. We were watching a play called Hamilton, and it inspired me to go out and get this book. I don't read books more than 100 pages. This is 700 something, so make dua for me. So I just want to read just something, and then we'll get into the speakers. And I want you to think about that Hamilton, by some historical accounts, has African-American or black blood in him. And I want you to think about what he's contributed and why this play is so significant and why it is the most popular play in the country today. So in this book, it says, Hamilton was the supreme double threat among the founding fathers, at once a thinker and a doer. And that, I believe, is what we're here to do today. We're supposed to take in the psychological aspects, and that's why we're going to have the psychiatrists in the room address those psychological concerns. We have the spiritual in Imam Ali, our spiritual guide. We have Saeed, who is our academic, our intellectual, who is going to allow us to kind of process this from a historical and immediate, put the politics of today in perspective. And then we have Hassan here, who, what does Hassan do? Hassan is the person who many people in the state know him from going out there and getting people out to vote. So he's a doer. And that's each one of us. So I would simply ask each one of you, and especially the beautiful young faces that you have here, that what are you going to do in this country? That is your country. That is your country. What are you going to do to make this country, your country, a better place? And I simply want to just read just a list of what Hamilton did. He was the Treasury Secretary. Our economy today is based on his thinking. So the Treasury Secretary, he was a clerk, a college student, a poet, an essayist, an artillery captain, wartime adjunct to Washington, battlefield hero, congressman, abolitionist. He was against slavery, and the economic policies had some of that in there. Started the Bank of New York, state assemblyman, member of the Constitutional Convention, orator, lawyer, polemist, educator, patron saint of the New York Evening Post, foreign policy theorist, and major general in the army. So, if he was an immigrant from the West Indies, of an unknown, shameful background, as he would even describe it, and he could contribute that much to the integral part of the society that we are part of, the stock market and all that stuff, then what is it that you can do? 3 generations it takes to become president. 3 generations. Donald Trump's grandfather was a German. His father born in the United States, he's president. JFK, the same thing. JFK's grandfather, Irish. His father born in the United States, John F. Kennedy, president. One of you as children, inshallah, will be the president of this beautiful country. But we first all have to figure out what are we going to do to help and contribute to this country. So with that, inshallah, we're going to have Imam Ali start us off, and then we'll have, I won't do the introductions after that, then you'll go ahead and introduce Saeed, and then Hassan, and then we'll do the breakout sessions.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Peace be with you all, and welcome to our guests who are visiting us perhaps for the first time. Someone put on Facebook today, I feel very sorry for Egyptian Americans because they got Sisi in Egypt and Trump in America. So I'm one of them. So why do we have this meeting? I went to bed at 3:30 a.m. on the day of election, the next day I guess. And I woke up and I had to go and teach in the morning, so I got a few hours sleeping, and I walked to Oakland University and had a nice discussion with students and professors, and one of them said that I remember the major events here in America is older than me: the assassination of John Kennedy, 9/11, and what happened yesterday. So and I thought it may be a good idea for us, for American Muslims, to come and talk to each other and think and reflect, and especially our youth. We need to listen to them, talk to them, empower them, and create together a plan for the future. Yes, we are concerned, and I want to use the word concerned, not terrified or panicked. We are not panicked, we are not terrified. We should not. It's not only when we talk to the media, it should be the reality. We should not be panicked or terrified. Yes, some have been shocked, but we need to understand that as American citizens, we are not the only people who are concerned. This issue is not a Muslim issue. So many other people are concerned. Very sincere, patriotic Americans are very much concerned about the result of this election. Very much concerned about the deep division that some claim that's unprecedented in the modern history. We have urban versus rural areas, men versus women, young versus old, educated versus uneducated, white versus colored people, blue collar versus white collar. We have this severe division and high level of hatred in our country. I hope and pray the president-elect is truthful to what he said, that we want to unite our country. We need to forget about the political campaign and move forward together as a country, and you guys will be tired of success, as he said. I hope so. So we as Muslims, the first thing I want to stress here is that this is not a Muslim issue. It's not a Muslim concern only. It is American concern, and also it's a global concern. So many actual presidents and councils, the European nations, spokesmen and others, they said we want to know more clarification about the policies of the American president-elect. People are concerned for various reasons. So we have to keep in mind that we are concerned like all other Americans. Yes, racism was part of the process. We feel very sad that the normalization of hatred, and that's really unprecedented. When someone, as I said today, when my 5th grade son bullies his classmate, he should be disciplined in school. But in American politics, those who bully others are awarded of being the President of the United States. So we are not here alone, and we should not actually play into this victim mentality. We are not alone, and perhaps there's a good reason for us to be also concerned about the concern of other racial minorities and religious minorities here in America. Why did Trump win? It's interesting, one of the political analysts said that we were all wrong. Out of 115 survey or poll suggested that Hillary will win. Out of 115, 112 suggested that Hillary will win the election. Racism is not the only factor here, because all these swing states, Obama won in 2008. And people have real issues. We have to understand this as Americans, and not only as American Muslim. We need to understand that people have real issues. If we were workers in the steel factories in Pittsburgh or auto industry here in Detroit, perhaps we would have voted Trump, regardless of our religion, race, or color, or political orientation. People really, as I agree with what has been said here, that people are revolting against the elites, the 1%. And I guess that most of us would agree that Donald Trump is one of these 1%, and he will align himself with the best interest of these lobbies. Some call him King Trump now, because he has the majority in the Congress, he can do whatever he wants, but we also need to understand this is not the case. He cannot do everything he said in the campaign, because Trump, as the president, is different from Trump, the candidate. And perhaps the best example of this, as many observed, that Iranian deal, he always said Iranian deal was a horrible deal, the worst deal ever, like everything is the worst ever, the best ever. But this is not only a deal between the United States and Iran. That was an international coalition that pressured Iran to sign this. So you have to convince the international community to change this deal if he won. He did not offer any other deal. Rather, he said it's a bad deal, and if I was there, I would have done a better deal. But he did not say what would be a better deal now and what to do about it. Also, building the wall. Someone was joking, if you are going to deport 2 million Mexicans, who is going to build the wall? So, I mean, practically speaking, it's not possible, and many people know that it's not possible. And also the ban of Muslims. Later on, he said, no, I didn't mean that. I meant that we will just have apply more strict procedures to just make sure that no terrorists will come here and so on. But so many people are concerned, including these poor refugees who escaped from the hell of ISIS, and now it's time for us to punish them and send them back. Send them back where? Where are you going to send back these Syrian families? That this very masjid was one of the mosques that welcomed and worked with the refugees until they are settled now. Tens of families found peace and comfort in this community thanks to our brothers and our sisters in particular who worked very hard without getting any credit from anyone except Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, working very tirelessly to welcome these refugees. So again, candidates, they can say whatever they want. But in reality, what's great about this country is that the system is much stronger than individuals. We survived George Bush for 8 years. Right? This country did not collapse. Right? So we as a community, as Americans, Muslims, non-Muslims, believers and non-believers, as people of faith, as people of ethical values, we can stand together because the system is much stronger than individuals. So people are revolting against the elite. The question for us as American Muslims, we need to ask ourselves, are we part of this elite? I know this question could be a surprise, but I think we need to rethink about it. We American Muslims, according to every research and statistics, that among the most highly educated communities and among those who make above average income. Read Pew Research and Gallup and others, you'll find this to be a fact. So are we among these elites who don't really care so much about other minorities' problem, and we don't really understand what other communities are going through? Workers, farmers. We don't really pay any attention, or we are not concerned at all about the minimum wage because most of us make much more than the minimum wage. It's not an issue for us. Is it time for us not to be elites and to think about these issues, about those people who are struggling to make ends meet? Are we part of the elite, American Muslims, that we just vote for the stronger who will give us more? In 2000 election, I remember very well, the mass majority of Muslims voted for George Bush. And Muslims were very much proud that it is the Muslims in Florida in particular who brought George Bush to the White House. Right? And similarly, majority of Muslims, I would argue, were voting for Hillary Clinton, but you never know. You never know. Is it the time for us to really represent an alternative as a community of faith, that we need to be people of faith, moral courage and vision, and prolonged commitment to the best interest of this country? Sometimes we take the far left policies, believing that this would serve the best interest of Muslims. And perhaps that's not the best option for us. I've heard this number of times. Many Muslims were supporting the far left liberal policies, thinking this is the best for us as Muslims, protect our freedom and democracy and so on. Perhaps it's time now to rethink about this. We, by definition, this community, by every definition, is a conservative community. We are very much conservative. The fact that we believe that the Quran is literally the word of God, and we pray 5 times a day and fast the month of Ramadan, you are very much conservative. But interestingly, we sometimes go far left, as if there's nothing in between. I think it's time for us to think about the third option. How can we develop a liberal conservatism or conservative liberalism that is faithful to our faith and faithful also to our country? Very quickly, what we need to do. We, of course, have to be very vigilant, given that the hate crimes against Muslims have reached its peak in the last year. We have to be very vigilant regarding our safety and security as individuals, as families, and as a community. As President Obama and President-elect Trump, they both talked about unity and the importance to heal the wounds. We, within our community, we should not wait until Trump healed the wound. We should heal our wound here in this very community, and everybody knows what I'm talking about. I get the honor to hear from 18 members who are running for the coming board. And some of them talked about bringing the community together, and none mentioned how you will do that. It's not words we say in political campaigns. We want to bring the community together. Easier said than done. How? We still need to fix our home first before we talk about alternatives and about showing people what we have. We all know that our democracy is not perfect. Even our constitution, perhaps one of the best constitutions written in history, is not also perfect. This is what the legal experts and professors of constitutional law say. That's why it's been amended a number of times and perhaps need to be amended again. And perhaps this is the time for American Muslims to contribute to how to perfect this political system. How to perfect it. We are not good parents only when we feed our children and send them to the best colleges. But when we think that we want to ensure that the future of our children will be better than our reality today. And perhaps the future of our grandchildren will be much better than our children's future. And we also need to rethink or reconsider our priorities. What are our priorities as individuals and as a community? We have plenty of resources. You and those who could not come tonight. We have plenty of smart, professional people. We have plenty of people who make a high income. So what's our priority as a community? If it's not education, if it's not activism, if it's not our youth, educating them how to understand Islam and practice Islam, and how to contribute to your community. We have to stop and resist every self-contradictory and anti-social Islamic religious approach. Very counterproductive. And as I told you, one of my students yesterday at Auckland told me that she was interpreting for a patient, and she just asked him whether he will vote or not, and said, no, I'm not going to vote for Hillary. She said, why? She said, because she's a female, and females cannot take any responsibility. They fail. I'm sorry, that's what he said. Okay? This is not for the defense of Hillary, but this is coming from some quote-unquote religious preaching. And others also consider participating in the political activities is a sin, it's haram. This reminded me of the Huffington Post article when they reported a Catholic church, small Catholic church in San Diego, California, writing in their newsletter that it is a mortal sin to fight for Democrats. It's a mortal sin. I will not go that far. I'm against using religion in such a very political way. But we need also to understand that these approaches are there. I've seen our youth working tirelessly, mobilizing the community, helping people to get registered and get early vote if you want. Our youth in this community and other communities worked very hard. And at the same time, some preach it's haram, it is religiously unlawful to go and vote or to vote for a woman. So I got a man, good luck. So we need to understand that we are part and parcel of this community, of this great country, And it's not just our concern, and we hope and pray that as many people were wrong in predicting that Trump will never be able to make it in the primary or in the national, and some say that as he beat 2 parties, perhaps he'll also be wrong. Perhaps he'll be one of the great American presidents if he's truthful to what he said. Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum. Jazakallah khair, Imam Ali, for your words of wisdom, and thank you, Fasahat, for yours. What Fasahat didn't tell you, of course, about Hamilton is that he was killed in a duel by Jefferson's vice president, so don't go imitating him too much. And I'm still wondering how he got tickets to the show. I guess, you know, that could be our own revolt against our own elite, but that's okay. I'm glad you got to see it, and now you put the pressure on all other husbands to see it. How many college students do we have here today? Okay. How many high school students? Wow. No football games tonight? How many middle school students? And how many younger than middle school? All right, good, excellent, good. Now this is open to all of you. How many of you on Wednesday had your Facebook or your social media just wall-to-wall grief and anxiety and tears and vomiting? Yeah? Okay. Right, so this is actually a very important point. The perspective that you have about the election and the perspective of how we got to the election result is very limited. Because I guarantee you, for every one of you who have a Facebook post that was just saturated with only one narrative of grief and anger and frustration and disbelief, there was an equal and parallel Facebook feed somewhere that was jubilant, that was giddy, probably also in disbelief, but ones that were quite opposite yours. And so if you're wondering which America exists, well, both of them exist. But what we find, though, is thanks in part to social media and the bubbles in which we live, these exist separate from one another. And they don't talk to one another, they don't interact with one another. In fact, they don't even acknowledge the existence of another. And I'd like to use this as a point of departure as we move forward to understand why this happened. Now, I know many of you are primarily here because you are concerned out of a sense of great anxiety and fear about the violence, about the rhetoric, and perhaps more dangerously that the rhetoric hasn't been retracted. In fact, in today's New York Times, the lead editorial from the newspaper was to tell Mr. Trump to disavow himself of this rather toxic rhetoric. And this doesn't have to do as much with what are going to be the policies coming out of Washington. Because as you know full well, for the last 8, maybe even longer years, nothing's really come out of Washington. Okay? What we have to realize that is more important is whether he will allow civil society to continue unregulated, unbridled, and unaccountable for how they are acting. That's always a possibility. It would be dishonest for me to say that there isn't the chance that he will let this occur because he needs his supporters. But no president, no administration likes unrest. And certainly no administration likes to foment unrest just for the sake of unrest. One of the greatest moments of opportunity and optimism that we have is the recognition that it is bad for business for America to burn and for people to target other Americans. So for those of you who are concerned and are feeling, as am I, a level of anxiety as to what is coming out of the rhetoric and what are some of the images that you're seeing on social media regarding the violence or the targeting of people, realize, as Imam Ali said, first of all, we are not alone. There really is something to the adage of misery-loving company. Some people have made the comparison that this is our 9/11. I promise you 11/9 is nothing like 9/11. At 9/11, we were by ourselves. Right now, we find Latinos, other people of color, people of various sexual identity, women are being similarly targeted with this frenzy that happens. And remember, when people are happy, and we should know this in Detroit, people do crazy things to express their celebration. For those of you who remember when the Tigers won the World Series in 1984, we practically burned the city down 17 years after, of course, the Detroit riots. But I'd like to go ahead and come back then to this idea of bubbles. We live in a social media bubble, but we also live in community bubbles. And this is a cross-section, hopefully, of what Islam in America should look like, but it really isn't. Because we tend to associate ourselves based on ethnicity, based on sect, and even based on socioeconomics. And we realize then that our reality as Muslims here at IEGD on a Friday evening are not the same as the reality of Muslims 10 miles away, 20 miles away, 30 miles away. That has to be understood as far as what are the dangers of this kind of bubble mentality. That is one explanation of what has happened to America as a result of, and what has been a cause of the election result. We have never understood, and certainly all of those poll watchers and pollsters didn't understand, that there is a significant part of this country that is anxious, that is fearful, that is feeling marginalized, and it's going to persist as this country moves to become a majority-minority country within 27 years. The idea of being great, or supposedly great, of having ownership and identity based on America in that capacity, and that being lost. Think back, for those of you who come from the Indian subcontinent and find when Muslim rule started to diminish. Think about it when it comes to the Muslim empire as a whole. Some of you, of course, were here in the lecture series a few months ago to understand the absolute grief that was felt when the caliphate disappeared. That is a very real feeling of loss. So people who are feeling as though their identity that is pegged to this country is going to be subsumed to something else is going to be a very painful process. It behooves us to be empathetic about that, and it behooves us to help provide a soft landing for that, and to ensure that this is not going to be the end of their world. What makes this complicated as well is the fact that there was a charismatic figure involved. Now, whether you like him or not, or whether he appeals to you or not, Trump was filling halls. Trump was appealing to large segments of this population. And I know people now are trying to rationalize it by saying, well, she won the popular vote, so what? Okay. We have to realize that he came about at a perfect time. And for those of you who have been really delving into it, he was a creation of the other political candidate who decided to go ahead and gamble that she could go ahead and beat him compared to the others. But we can go ahead and have a different conversation about that at a different time. So you realize then that what he was able to appeal to was not statistics, was not data, was not following 538.com or the New York Times or Gallup or anything else on the cable news stations. He was able to appeal to something more direct, people's feelings and people's experience, even if he did not share those experiences. And realize that this is something that's happening not just in America at this moment. Trump has come to America, but before there was a Trump here, there's a Modi in India. There's an Erdogan in Turkey. There's a Putin in Russia. If you see the rise of all of these figures, the methodology is exactly the same. He has been able to go ahead and appeal to something much more deep than just what's up here. Appealing to people's identity, appealing to people's potential when they feel as though they've been marginalized. This is not just about race. This is about people who feel as though their dignity has been taken away from them. And so we have to then do some soul searching in understanding that how different are we than your average Trump supporter who is swooned and swayed by a charismatic figure. How often do we then become subject to charismatic figures, either within our own community within the Muslim world, because I know that there's a lot of people who ironically detest the fact that Trump came to power, but glorify the fact that Erdogan came to power. A certain level of honesty and sincerity requires us to be just as critical of him as we are of the person who is now our president. And finally, the third reason why we find the results of the election as they are is that an awful lot of people in this country simply abdicated their own judgment and their own critical thinking, either to polls and data or to one man who was speaking directly to them and their needs. Even despite the fact that there were facts that were incontrovertible and a reality that was indisputable, they decided to put that aside because they liked what somebody was telling them. And we have to be honest again to realize how different are we when it comes to our suspension of critical thinking in light of somebody who fits the part or looks the part because of what they're dressed in, or in the accent that they're speaking, or in the language in which they're speaking to us. Finally, if you want to understand what is the commentary that Trump is providing, it doesn't really have to do with us. It doesn't have to do with African Americans. It doesn't have to do with Latinos. It doesn't have to do with women or people of different sexual orientation. It has to do with globalization. The entire planet is moving, and Trump is a reaction to that. So when we talk about all of these trade deals, when we talk about the free movement of people, when we talk about the boundaries and the borders of countries disappearing and currencies disappearing, we have to realize that globalization has created Trump in the same way that he has created Modi and Erdogan and Putin. People are looking now for an anchor to hold onto in an ever-shifting world. Unfortunately, half of this country has decided that their anchor is somebody who doesn't necessarily like the other half of it. But you see this happening in many different parts of the world. So what we then have as a task moving ahead is becoming better informed in understanding what are the forces that are occurring around us and affecting us. And I'll give you one example. We're talking about 9/11. At 9/11, the top 100 economies in the world, 51 of them were corporations, 49 of them were countries. Today, 69 of the top 100 economies are corporations, and only 31 are actually nations. This is the trend of globalization. And people are worried in this big game of global musical chairs that they're not going to have a chair when the music stops. We are in a position where we are, for many of us, we've been through this. We have lost the Muslim empire. Some of us, like myself, grew up in England, and we lost that empire. So in many ways, this is my third time around to see an empire on a wobble. We bring a particular perspective that we can then share with others to realize that it's not the end of the world when this movement is causing all of these shifts in their lives and their identities. But in order to go ahead and be able to engage, you have to actually first acknowledge that they exist. And to do that, you have to leave your bubble. Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you so much, Ma'am Ali Leila, as well as Professor Saeed Khan, for such intellectual words. My name is Hassan Sheikh. I am the Executive Director with Emerge USA Michigan. We're a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization geared towards getting the Muslim American community more politically engaged and involved, getting out to vote, educating, mobilizing, engaging. I'm going to start off and keep this short and simple because we are in a time constraint. But I'm going to start off by saying 3 words. We need you. Everybody in this room is here because they feel passionate about what has just occurred. Am I right or am I wrong? Now, what are we going to do with that passion? Are we going to take that passion and let it out? Are we going to take that passion and channel it? Again, I'm going to repeat. We need you. Throughout this whole process, I've been trying to explain to different communities how imperative it is that the Muslim American community gets involved. This whole debacle, this ugly election, has some beautiful perspective behind it. This is an opportunity. This is an opportunity for our community to mobilize, to engage, and to strategize. This may have been the push in the butt that our community needed to get politically involved. For years and years, myself being born in this community, it's been taboo to talk about politics in the mosque. A lot of times it's been complacent. We'll go to house parties, we'll hear our uncles and our aunties talking about politics overseas, but completely complacent about the politics right here in our own homes. This is maybe what we needed. We must make sure as a community that we organize and we ensure that we have an impact on public policy and legislative changes that are being made. That is what impacts us on a day-to-day basis. Now, what did our organization do throughout this election process? Just to give you a little bit of background on what maybe you all could have been involved with if you weren't. Every week we held 2 to 4 voter registration drives at various masjids, trying to register as many Muslim Americans as we possibly could. And we registered as many as we possibly could. We held 9 candidate forums where we brought the candidates right to your doorstep, where you could converse with them, learn about them, know who is trying to represent you in office. One of them just being held here, what was it, a week ago, 2 weeks ago? We had a beautiful turnout in line with the Thanksgiving Day dinner. We had congressional candidates, state representative candidates, local candidates, and it was wonderful seeing the interaction amongst our community with these candidates, to see that we need representation, that we have a voice. We had debate watch parties, if you could call them debates. But we had debate watch parties at different venues, where we had many individuals, maybe even in this room, who came and attended, who sat with fellow individuals who were passionate about the political process, who wanted to learn, who wanted to know what each person stood for, and came. We held absentee ballot drives, where just about a couple of weeks ago, 1 or 2 weeks ago, we had the Troy City Clerk right here in this very masjid passing out absentee applications, and then returning a week later with ballots. We had National GOTV Khutbah Day, in which Imam Ali Layla gave a beautiful khutbah about how important it was to get out and vote. GOTV, get out the vote. More than 40 some masjids participated in this. We were partnered up with Michigan Muslim Community Council. And now furthermore, leading up to the actual day of the election, about 7 days before, we held an extensive phone banking operation where we made out approximately more than 20,000 phone calls to registered Muslim American homes within 7 days. We had amazing amounts of volunteers and passion, and come out, we had calling stations in Canton, 2 in Dearborn, 1 in Royal Oak, and pop-ups everywhere. It was beautiful to see how many people were coming out. But not enough people were coming out. Not enough people were engaged. Not enough people at that time saw how important it was for our community to be engaged. Like I said, maybe this is what we needed. To fill this room up with individuals who now care. Not just this room, amongst our whole community, nationwide, even worldwide. I'm getting messages from my cousins in Pakistan, of all places, who are making fun of our country for the election cycle that we just went through. You know? How sad. Because growing up, I would go to Pakistan in 1998 when the Bulls won the championship, 2004 when the Pistons won the championship, you know, having things to show off about. Now here I'm getting messages from my cousin Hamid, who likes to rub things in my face. You know, it's sad. But again, this may be what we needed. And finally, the very day of the election, we had an election results watch party where we teamed up with Access, APIA Vote, MMCC, and Take on Hate, 5 different organizations. Why? The thought was we wanted to bring all the Muslim American community together in one place. Enough is enough. We all have one goal. We need to unify. We cannot be doing things here, there, and there. We need to unify our efforts and show how much power we have in one unified voice. It's imperative. And I know that on actual election day, when the results came out, there were many, many emotions. Some from stoic emotions. Some I've heard of people crying. Some people were upset. Some people were hopeful. Whatever your emotions were, it's okay. We are human beings, and we will feel emotions. Back in 2008, I'm sure that the other side had some certain emotions when President Obama was elected as well. It's okay to feel emotions. That is what makes us human. But what are we going to do with these emotions? What are we going to do with that passion? I'm extremely proud of our community for how far we've come just within this cycle, to see how involved we were. But I'm sorry, my brothers and sisters, we were not involved enough. We were not engaged enough. Getting involved and getting engaged 3 months before an election, in an election year, that's not going to cut it. That will not cut it. And that will change. We will change that. Everybody in this room will change that. As I look out, I see leaders, I see intellectuals. Just to show a display, how many individuals in this room, I want all the individuals in this room that are between the ages of 14 and 17 to please stand up. Please stand up. What? Next election, you will be voting. Yes. You will be voting. And the 17-year-olds, there's an election in 2 years. That you need to vote for the midterms as well. Thank you. Again, this was my professor as well, so I'm always learning something. Point being, the work started November 9th. Point being, that it is your responsibility as future voters, future stakeholders, individuals who want to make an impact on this nation, to get educated, to get involved. All of you that just stood up, I'm going to go further than that. The ones that just voted in this election, the ones that are 18 to 24, and even older, and older, and older, we need all of you. And I'm going to again say this, because I know I'm on a time constraint, and I apologize that I'm going over to the organizers, but this is important that we understand this. We need you. We need volunteers. We need people to get engaged. We need people to mobilize. We have 4 years until the next election. What are we going to do? We have 2 years until the midterm elections. What are we going to do? We need strategy. We need to initiate the strategy. We need to find out what the strengths of our brothers and sisters are and how we can plug them in and make the most of that. I love the fact that I see so many individuals in this room. And I love the fact that I see so many Muslim Americans nationwide that are so passionate about the outcome. Because again, I think that is what we needed. I'm going to stop because I know that my wife is telling me that I need to shut up back there. Hi, Sumaya. I'm going to leave you with this note. Over this past election, we have lit a spark. This tiny spark, which was beautiful. It was beautiful. What are we going to do with that spark? Are we going to take it and are we going to start a giant bonfire? Bring s'mores. Halal marshmallows, of course. Or are we going to let it burn out? We cannot let it burn out. We have to take the momentum that we have just gained and carry that forward. Everybody in this room is capable of doing great things, and collectively, we must build coalitions and networking and friendships, not within just the Muslim American community, but with other communities. We must reach out to other communities that have the same agendas as us, because in numbers comes power. And inshallah, if you have any other questions, please feel free to reach me at hsheikh@emerge-usa.org and my phone number is 248-719-9774. Thank you so much for your time today. Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum. So we're going a little bit over, but what we're going to do is we're going to, in interest of time, we're going to move the program around a little bit. But before I do that, we have counselors here, so I'd like the youth mentors, counselors, therapists, if you could please stand up. And I want you to take a look around at any of those people who are representing that interest, if they're willing to stand up. Okay, so we have a few of the sisters here. If you can look over there. So there's a specific reason that the organizers wanted the people with this background here, because obviously as parents, as youth, we are all concerned, and so they have an expertise, and so please tap into that expertise. So the next speaker will be addressing the adults, so let me just explain what we're going to do next. So So all the students who are in middle school to college, they're going to meet in the men's prayer area, and please make your way over there as quick as possible because we're in a time crunch. And all of the adults, you're going to please stay here. And sorry, anybody who's in 4th grade and up, 4th grade and up. Forrest, get over there. All right, so anybody who's in 4th grade and up, please make it over to the men's prayer area. Brothers and sisters, please enter that area, and then we'll start with the next part of the program, inshallah. For the adults who are in the room, I would ask that you please move up as those other seats become vacant, so please move up. Let me make another clarification. Anybody who's in college students, please stay here. Your professor, Saeed Khan and Imam Ali, is pursuing his PhD. You need to be in class here in the social hall. So college students, please stay in this hall.
Fourth grader. Yeah, community का level है. नहीं. आपको fourth grade community का level. Oh, come on. It's not
Could I please have the adults who are in the room please move up a little bit? Makes their way back to their seats. We would just like to thank the organizers who are part of the Community Affairs Committee, CAC Committee, and MYGD for organizing the program on such short notice. Again, we would like to thank all of the speakers who made their time to come out and address everybody. So the next part. So those of you who are getting some snacks in the back, if you could try and do that within the next 1 minute, and then we'll go ahead and start. So if you could pick up your tea and your snacks, and then please make your way back to your seats and we'll get started. Okay, so the next speaker I forgot to mention is Sister Sabah Maruf. She's a psychiatrist, and she will be addressing the psychological aspects of this election. And so, Sister Sabah Maruf, who happens to be my wife.
Okay, assalamu alaikum, everybody. I think we're all getting situated here. So I have to say that I was kind of nervous about addressing everyone today, because I'm, as all of you are, dealing with my own emotions. I kind of felt like, how do I talk to other people about talking to our kids when it's just been kind of a roller coaster, and I know that everyone's been feeling that way. First of all, I just want to say that it's so nice to have everybody here. So thank you for coming, and I think that that says a lot about us, where we are, and what our needs are. Certainly, and Hassan isn't here, but I'm going to backtrack a little bit. Certainly, this is a time when we need to talk about our next steps and what we're going to do, and mobilizing and empowering. But one of the main points that I'm going to emphasize today is it's okay to take a step back and process our own feelings and talk a little bit about self-care. So there's 3 things that I want to address. That's one of them. And then how do we help our children? And then the third, and kind of piggybacking on what Professor Saeed mentioned, is recognizing our allies and our friends, and how we all contribute to the American narrative. And that really ties in, I think, to the psychological aspects, because, and again, I'm sure that you've all had your roller coaster of emotions the past, I mean, it's been like not even 72 hours. It's just been up and down. But as you have all probably experienced, it takes a lot of energy and to feel that down. We don't want to be low. It's like you want to bounce back. It's okay to feel those emotions. That's what I want to talk about today. But part of that is looking at the optimistic side too, and recognizing our allies and our friends. So before we talk about processing this with our children, we have to talk about processing these feelings ourselves, recognizing our feelings, allowing, as Hassan mentioned very eloquently, allowing yourself to feel the emotions and not to suppress them. It's okay to have feelings. Feelings are not bad. Feeling ups, I know this is typical psychiatry talk, but it's really true. Okay, fine. I'm paranoid. See, I am paranoid. Feeling upset, sad, angry, and confused is not necessarily a bad thing. It's when we suppress these feelings or tell ourselves that we shouldn't feel a certain way that when we can have problems. So be honest with yourself. Allow yourself to feel, but take care of your heart also. When I first heard about, it's because I had mentioned we were, it was a one-day trip to Chicago, and we came back from this play, which was amazing. Talk about self-care. I mean, it was all about the revolution and our founding fathers and what this country was founded on. And I thought it was so ironic that we watched this musical on election night. Because I kind of left that play, and I was surrounding us, everybody was checking on their phones when they could, like during the halftime, in intermission. And you could tell everybody was anxious, but it was amazing to watch this play that's about our founding fathers and the revolution, and all of that, the psychology behind it, and to realize that our country has gone through so much, and we have, despite that, we have persevered. So as a knee-jerk reaction, when I found out about the election, I thought about the stages of grief. The typical textbook stages of grief for Anne Kubler-Ross, she described these when these are the stages that we feel, as she describes, after the death or loss, which is denial, depression, anger, bargaining, and acceptance. And I'm going to kind of talk about another model that's out there. But really, my mind just jumped to this because this was a loss. And I know this is how we all feel. It hits you in waves, much like the loss of a loved one. You're going about your day, and all of a sudden you're like, oh my God, Trump is president. Kind of hits you over and over again, right? So it does, it hits us like waves, and this is what grief is. And psychologists will tell you that with any loss, if one pushes these feelings away or down and tries not to feel them, they're going to come out in one way or another. Be it through anger, irritability, aggression, or acting out. With kids, sometimes they do act out when they're having these feelings that they can't express verbally. And so there's a definition of what we often grieve for, which captures what we're all feeling now. There is a loss. There's a loss of hope, of expectation, illusions, and what we projected would have been the path that we were on. And I would also, that was a quote, but I would also add, it's a loss of what we thought our country was. Because 8 years ago, and I'll even go back further than that, how many of you remember hearing Barack Obama at the 2004 Democratic Convention when Kerry was running?
I do.
That was an amazing speech, and I think all of us were just amazed. I remember myself where I was watching that speech and just thinking, oh my God, how amazing would it be if he was our president? And he was. And how was it for our psyche that the President of the United States, his middle name was Hussein, whether he's Muslim or not, but I think that just really lifted our morale. And I would echo what Saeed was saying about living in a bubble. I think that we were in the Obama bubble also. That regardless of what we felt about some of his policies and drone attacks, and definitely, I mean, that's a big thing, but just, it really lifted our morale to have a president like this that shared our name, that advocated for us, that recognized us as legitimate parts of this society. So there's a loss in that too, that we feel that we're losing that. It doesn't have to be that way, but that's, realistically what we're feeling. So this is a collective loss. It's a collective grief. So give yourself time to grieve. There's another model that I was reading about of grief that's actually kind of delineated as 3 phases. And I thought this was interesting, and maybe this will ring true for some of you. But the first stage that they describe is a denial of fact. That kind of goes along with the classic model. But where you feel this numbness, anxiety, or this sense that this can't be real or possible. And along with this, it might seem that it's kind of unproductive to have these feelings and to recognize these feelings, but it's actually really important. It's actually a buffer. My sister-in-law the other day, I was like on social media, I think too much, and we'll mention that too. And I could feel myself feeling a little bit panicky last night. Besides, like, you need to just calm down, it's gonna be okay. And I talked to my sister-in-law, who I really look up to, who's also a psychiatrist, and she just said it really well. She said, denial is underrated. I mean, there's a value in being in denial sometimes. It's a buffer. It allows our psyche to take stock of what's happening and adjusting to the new reality. So it's not that these feelings are not productive or that you're wasting your time or that it's all fluff. There's a reason for this. The second stage is kind of the second storm, an upsurge of intense emotions such as anger or fear, sadness, and a deep anxiety. And here, again, it's really important to identify our thoughts and feelings and let them out in a safe space. And so maybe that's kind of what we're doing here today, what we're hopefully allowing for our kids too. It's important, and also it can be through physical activity or talking it out, seeking out help, surrounding yourself with loved ones, going out with your friends, talking with like-minded people. And then the third stage, which inshallah we're all going to get to, I hope, is acceptance and meaning-making. And that's assimilating the loss into our way of thinking so that we can find a new way to live in this new reality. So skipping these processes, this grieving, sometimes makes it only draw out longer. There's an old psychological adage that says, what we resist persists. So it might seem like a waste of time, it might seem unproductive, but it's really, really important. And I think also, along with, you might notice if you are big into social media, don't feel pressured to immediately take action and jump into doing something. Sometimes if we, and I know Saeed agrees with this, sometimes we want to just do, but it's like we have to be meaningful and thoughtful and allow ourselves to feel. And this kind of segues into the area of self-care, which I mentioned too. It's really, really important, especially if you really have to check into your feelings. Again, this is all before we process this with our kids. Be aware if you're starting to feel a loss of control, if you are feeling panicky, depressed, or so upset that you're feeling paralyzed for long periods of time, then take stock of why you might be feeling this way. Maybe limit your time on social media. Surround yourself with people that make you laugh or peers that you can talk to. And problem solving and meaning making is going to emerge naturally when you're ready, when you've had time to process these feelings. Also focus on what you can control. Anxiety usually comes from when we have a loss of control, when we don't feel like we can control what's going on. So focus on what you can control. And be realistic too and keep it in check. Again, I'm going to echo, we don't want to be panicking or in this frenzy. America was founded on democratic principles. It's not a monarchy, it's not a dictatorship. Our rights are not going to be stripped away, hopefully at all, and they're definitely not going to be stripped away overnight. So kind of keeping that in check. So now once you kind of feel like you're more in control of your feelings, and actually also, balance it with your spouse too. Who feels ready kind of to have these conversations with our kids. So an example, like I mentioned, we were in Chicago, and I felt really, really bad that I was not going to be there physically with the kids in the morning when they were going to find out about the election. Now, my kids are a little bit younger, but my oldest is in 5th grade, and I felt like it was really important for me to talk to him before he went to school and talk to the other kids and, started to feel more panicky or anything. So I was like, we got to call them. By the time we were going to get home, they would have already left for school with the person that was watching them. So Fazad kind of, like he mentioned, he was definitely more in control of his feelings. I picked up the phone, I was calling my son, and I could tell that I was about to burst out crying. So he took over, and he did it in a very beautiful way that was age appropriate too. That's not going to just bombard them with anxiety and emotion. So if you don't feel like you're in a space or in that stage where you can talk to them without your own anxiety bubbling over, then let maybe your spouse take over, or just take some time. It doesn't have to be done right then. So once you're more in control of your feelings, then that is a time to have, and I'm sure you all have had, an open discussion with your kids. Try not to project your own feelings onto them. So ask open-ended questions and avoid questions like, are you worried about this, or is this making you feel anxious? So open-ended questions. Young kids can be acutely aware of negative perceptions of what makes them different. Ask them what their friends are saying to get an idea too. Sometimes their peers can be really helpful also. I asked Ismail what his friends were saying. I thought this was helpful. He said that, and mind you, he's in his school, he's not in public school. One of his friends said that, Trump might make the economy better. Okay, you know what? That might be a good thing to think. I'm not going to argue with him about that. If that's, helping them feel better, I'm not going to, And then also we know that it's not just going to be one conversation. Like all important topics that we tackle with our kids, it's a series of conversations. And especially as things are changing around us, and we're going through these stages also. And then as you all know, we know even for young kids, they are aware of what's going on, and they're very perceptive to not only the verbal cues, but the nonverbal cues, how we're saying things. And so kind of just really, to remind ourselves of that too. Okay, let's see. So while you might feel anxious or this loss of control, rein some of that in. If you feel that panic, your kids are going to pick up on this. But at the same time, I'm not saying to give them false reassurances either. It's okay to be realistic, and it's okay to say we don't know exactly how this is going to play out, but focus on what we do know. Again, that our country is a democracy, that there's checks and balances in place, and finally, really, that there's many good people that are our friends and our allies. I talked to one of my friend's kids who's a senior in high school. And again, I agree. I think some kids are doing better than the parents, than the adults. Because he was very matter of fact, and he said, well, you know, we did a mock election at school. Half the kids voted for Trump, half for Hillary, but I know that, and I was really surprised, this was very astute on his part, I know that just because someone's voting for Trump doesn't necessarily mean they agree with every single thing that he said. Kind of reflecting on what the professor was saying too. So it does not mean that half the country wants to ban Muslims. And that's an important message to our children, so they don't feel that half their school is against them, as they interact with their teachers and their friends that might be Trump supporters. Many people don't make the connection. Many people that voted for him might not make that connection of what that vote meant for minorities, which is a whole other discussion of white privilege. But so those are some ways that you can talk to your children. And then also, this is a teaching point of how we deal with disappointment. We're all disappointed, but we have to elevate the level of conversation at home. The first thing that my 10-year-old said was, everyone that voted for Trump is stupid. And I had to suppress my agreement. I almost agreed with him. But again, we use this as a teachable moment that explain kind of maybe what other people are thinking. We don't want to resort to name calling. We need to be above that, right? When they go low, we go high. And we do that at home too. Our kids are listening to us talk about this with each other, with our friends, and how we respond to them, and they're going to pick up on that. We have to show them how we can handle this setback. And then we have to show our kids how we can disagree, but in a civil and healthy manner. And again, we've lived through disappointment in the past with the re-election of Bush, for example, most recently. Lastly, I just want to end with, as I was mentioning, about friendships, friends and allies, and recognizing our allies and understanding that their stories are part of the American narrative also. So I was at work on Thursday, and one of my support staff is a white American, and we get along very well. The other psychiatrist I work with is African American, and we talked, and she was devastated, but she, you know, I kind of talked to her a little bit about this too, and you know, it just helped, and I'm sure many of you that are at work that are with like-minded people, it really does help, and that really helps to be around, just to kind of feel that support, that not everybody is against us by any means. But basically my friend, one of the support staff at my work, Kelly, you know, she's a white American, she lives over here, I think close to Washington Township, it's pretty far. I work in Clarkston once a week, that's where she is. And I didn't want to make any assumptions, but I kind of assumed that she might be voting for Trump, because that area, you know, like you go there, we went there for apple orchard, and there's so many Trump signs. But as I found out a few weeks before the election, she wasn't, and her son lives in Chicago. He was devastated that what happened with this election. But what we did I think this was kind of our way of dealing with it, was we both kind of shared our family stories, and I talked to her about, as an immigrant, you know, child of an immigrant, and kind of what brought my parents here, and you know, all that. And then what she shared with me, I just felt was so powerful, so I kind of wanted to share that with you. Her own story. Her family is from Alabama, originally. Her great-grandfather owned a plantation. And this was after the Civil War, but basically they were indentured servants, we would call them. I mean, that's kind of what they were, indentured servitude. This was like during Reconstruction. So her grandfather, great-grandfather, actually owned a plantation. Her grandfather made the conscious decision that he did not agree with the way with these practices, and he wanted to stand for equality. And so he left his family, he left what would have been his inheritance, and he was disowned for kind of shunning that way of life. He went on to marry a Native American, a daughter of an Indian princess. So this is my friend's grandparents. And she was actually disowned from her family as well. And they went on to own their own small farm where they grew cotton, and they had 7 or 8 children of their own, and they did all the field work on their own. They did not hire, they didn't have, you know, continue the pattern of black people doing that kind of work. And I just thought this was amazing, because we can't allow a certain people to just shape the narrative. We have our narrative, we have our stories that contribute to the narrative as immigrants or as first generation, second generation Muslims. But there's a whole other area too. There's children of abolitionists, and their story is important too. There's children of civil rights activists that are amongst us also. These are all part of the narrative, and we can't forget that we have allies and we have friends. And I think it's really important to share this with our children so they know, so they don't feel alone, because we really are all in this together. And then actually I just want to leave you with, just on a practical note, that we are actually having, well, Lena from CARE was just going to add a few notes. She couldn't be here. But she also wants to make sure that the community knows, if we're talking about bullying or any kind of incidents, that we really are encouraging everyone to report all these incidents to CARE. And then CARE Safe Spaces has been working with schools and teachers, as well as other organizations, to help keep schools as safe and students as integrated as possible. So just know that. November 19th, that's next Friday, we're actually having an anti-bullying workshop here. And she's going to be giving, Lena's from CARE, she's going to be giving insight on the strategies and tools recommended to combat bullying and harassment in schools. So that's going to be an event that's happening next Friday. So.
So we want to open it up now for questions and answers. I'll just read just one of the texts that I received from one of you in the audience right now, that in addition to looking at the big picture, we need to connect and make some efforts to do things in our own community locally, not just in the masjid, but even outside the masjid. And he listed a few things: volunteering, creating regular projects to help the homeless, feeding the poor, scholarships to top-ranked kids of the local high schools. IGD volunteers can also visit old people's housing and assisted living and provide education training to people who are jobless. So things that are just beyond our community. This was a suggestion from one of our community members. So at this point, our speakers are here, and if there's any questions, then they can handle those.
Can you explain what you talk about, the comparison of Trump with other leaders such as Putin or Turkish president? In which way you were trying to compare it? I think some people might misunderstood that.
Oh, all right. So the question was about the comparison that I made between Trump and the other leaders. I actually wasn't making a comparison between Trump and Modi and Erdogan and Putin. I was saying that the rise of the charismatic leader is a common denominator in more than one country. And the way that people are responding to these charismatic leaders is a function of globalization and the fact that they are pushing back on it by trying to assert their own national identity about what is it about Indian nationalism, Turkish nationalism, Russian nationalism, in the face of the fact that globalization is blurring the lines between that. This is not a comparison of Trump versus Erdogan versus Modi. But it is a factor to try to understand the rise of these particular individuals at the same time across the world.
Thank you.
Why are you voting for more than one? Well, no, actually, this is a true story. Somebody sent me a screenshot of somebody's ballot from Washington, and they actually wrote in the name Recep Tayyip Erdogan instead of Trump and Hillary Clinton. So, yeah. You saw that too? Yeah, I'd actually predicted that 5% of the Muslim vote would go to Erdogan in the US. So.
I just have a general comment. We talk about what happened in America, but the major risk is not only in America. What we hear in European media now is, okay, America did it, so in Europe, probably more and more far right, and now people also say they did it, we can do it. And now the far right in France, they are ready to get the power now. Say, okay, we are ready. There was a Brexit, now Trump, now all the German far right and France and Italy and Holland and everything, they are all ready, they are all in the top of the elections. And the next elections, now we are pretty sure that's going to happen now. That's a bigger reason that what happened in Trump.
And that I think is a very, very important fact. And so now I think it's important to go ahead and say which came first and which came first and which came first. A lot of people say that the rise of Trump was in fact a consequence to the fact that Brexit happened. that the idea of the rise of populism there, and Seth disagrees, is that people felt emboldened that here was an entire community that was not being heard. And if you take a look again at the demographics in the election of Brexit, people in London, by and large, didn't think that people outside London were going to vote for Brexit.
Nobody said the Brexit was going to happen.
Exactly.
In the UK, nobody believed to this.
And in many ways, again, what you have there is a bubble. So you have the bubble of people who live within London and inside the M25 Beltway. Most of the people who voted to leave the European Union came from the north, okay, from outside London. But also what's interesting is some of the people who voted for Brexit inside London, they were South Asian immigrants. Indian Pakistanis actually voted to leave the Brexit. Why? Because they were voting in an anti-immigrant way. They said that the Polish and other Eastern European immigrants are coming here and they are, and the French, yeah, I was trying to give you a pass, okay. But that they were coming and they were encroaching upon us. So you had actually immigrants who were being racist against other immigrants, okay. So this, I think, brings up a very interesting point about the importance of coalition building in the U.S. That there's going to be an effort made to try to demonize Muslims by pegging not white America against Muslims, but other people of color against Muslims. So this was actually attempted after Orlando when it came not on the basis of ethnicity, but it came on the basis of sexual identity. There was a move, in fact there was a tweet by Trump to say to the LGBTQ community, look at what they did, meaning Muslims in Orlando at the nightclub, I will protect you better than anybody else, okay? And fortunately, the LGBTQ community rejected Trump's statement and said, no, we don't blame the Muslims for this. So this notion of divide and conquer is going to be a common formula for the next 25, 30 years among these various groups that are part of the minority coalition. And I think that we have to be very mindful about how that comes about. But getting back to your original point, I think it's important to know that one of the first phone calls to Trump to congratulate him came from Marine Le Pen, who is the leader of the far-right National Front movement in France. Everyone now is seeing that this is a matter of hope for them. And Europe has been percolating for a very long time, whether it is